I'm Sepideh. I'm in the DevTools marketing team. My focus is on Bamboo, so I'm basically the product marketing manager for Bamboo.
Oh, I was going to take that, but great uses. So I'm Natasa, and I'm executive assistant to our two GMs here, Eric Whitman, who's our GM of Developer Tools, and Bernardo Del, who's our GM of Operation. And here I want to introduce our head of Developer Advocacy, Grace Francisco, and our head of product marketing for DevTools, Alison Huselid. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. So I wanted to start my first question about this article I read with the Washington Post in 2014 about why there's so few women in tech, and it talks about companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and how they're heavy on having males in the tech or in the tech area of their business, but also in the business leadership area of the business. And the article talks about how women that come from business schools and they want to have leadership roles in these companies, and they go and they find that they're kind of the only woman in the room, and it's a little discouraging and causes them to go to other to seek other outlets, other professional outlets. So it seems like there's kind of an issue with not only are women in engineering kind of there's more men, there's also women that finished business schools, and you both have engineering and business backgrounds. So I kind of wanted to open my first question with if you can give me a little bit give me some information about your academic backgrounds and your upbringings as well.
Sure. So I had a very non-traditional upbringing, meaning, ideally, when I was very young, I thought, I am going to be a legal boy. I'm going to be a mad scientist someday. It didn't work out that way for me. I ended up leaving home when I was 17. I finished Lowell, which is an academic elite school. At least back then, I was in the top 10. And I finished pretty early. I got all my studies done in 3.5 years, left when I was 17, and went to work right away, worked my way through school. So I went through the community college route for a while, took computer science, math, and physics there, transferred to San Francisco State, continued computer science for a while there, but all this was while I was also working. Eventually, I landed in a tech company, and that encouraged me even more to continue down the route with computer science, but it was very difficult at that time to actually finish a computer science degree at night, which is when I was taking classes and on weekends. So I shifted to a management degree, which there were tons of classes for at night. And I eventually finished that degree many, many years later. And somewhere in between there, I ended up in a tech company a small company called IBM, and landed my first programming job there. So I was probably at that time the only woman in the valley that was actually doing software development without a degree. So it was kind of scary, but I just kind of went for gold, and really appreciated the opportunity and the experience of doing that with them.
So for me, I had a bit more of a traditional background. Probably from the age of 13, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, which I think is pretty enough to figure out what you want to do. I was always really good at math and science, and so I thought, well, why not engineering? And so I got to high school, I took all the advanced math classes that I could, and I went to Boston University for an engineering undergrad, and basically found that I was, like Natasha said, one of the few women in those classes, but never really discouraged by it. It was really, I thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer actually, and ended up in computers because that was a lot more fun than the early classes you had to take. And so, pretty traditional, but as I started going through my career, my first job was also at IBM, ironically enough, as a developer. I kind of got sick of just being behind a computer and typing up code. I wanted to work with people, and I had different jobs throughout the years where I more and more got to work cross-functionally, in product and sales and partnerships, and I realized that was way more fun to work cross-functionally and develop these other groups. So I went back for my MBA, and I used that to really take the technical background I had to continue in the tech industry, but do jobs that I was way more passionate about, where I got to interact with people more than I had ever before. And so a little bit more traditional, but definitely maybe pretty early on I wanted to be in the technical space and go from there.
Thank you. In along the same line of the first question, we all noticed there's a big gap between men and women in like all these big companies. And despite like our expectations, my personal expectation to see like more women studying computer science, it's not happening. So based on one of the recent studies, to be more specific, 37% of computer science majors were women in the mid-80s, with a big decrease to 18% in 2012. So that makes me want to ask this question: if you ever felt uncomfortable being in those type of environments that everybody, like almost like the majority of people were like male and men, were you ever discouraged by anyone, and how did you deal with it?
I can tackle that one first. So I actually found I was being discouraged more at the high school level rather than any other time when I got older. So I remember getting to high school and messing up my schedule, and I had to fix it so I could get in an advanced math class. And the head of all the guidance counselors in the town I grew up in basically said, "Oh, you don't need that class." And I was like, "Why?" He was basically suggesting that women are not interested in math, so there'd be no possible reason for me to do that. I was a 13-year-old girl, and this was the head of all the guidance counselors in the city. Like, these people have such a tremendous impact on so many children, I couldn't even imagine it. Fortunately for me, I was headstrong, and I said, "No, you can put me in that class." And so I ended up in the class, and later on in high school, he was really sort of admitted, he said, "Thank you so much for doing that. I would have had no idea." He just didn't even realize like that was his bias, and so I was able to restrain from the person as sort of standing up for myself. So that's probably the only time I was really ever discouraged. My family, my mom was the one that was good in math. My dad was the creative one and the artist and played guitar and still does. So it's a little bit of traditional role reversal there. So I never felt like it was something a girl couldn't do. And when I got to college, I was never intimidated really by being one of the few women, because I was pretty happy with math. That made me happy. So I kept going with it.
I didn't feel any real discouragement in my early days of my career because, one, I grew up as a tomboy. I played tennis with my dad all the time. I was small enough for a long time when he needed help underneath the sink to do plumbing, and my arms were strong enough that I could get under there and like do the wrench stuff underneath the sink. I was also the one helping him with the car. So, I was doing stuff that, wasn't exactly girly girl stuff, and I was never much of a girly girl. And when I played tennis, I always played with boys. So I was very comfortable at an early age hanging out with boys, playing with boys, interacting with them. And so, being one of the few people in some of my classes, being great at math and physics, I had that competitive nature in being like the first one out the door after a final exam and watching everyone else sweat as they were trying to finish the physics or the math problems. And to have boys come to me for help around their math problems or physics problems was really comforting and gave me a level of confidence going into work that I felt good, like I had something really valuable to offer. The only time in a workplace where I had very specific discouragement was at a little tech company. It was a satellite company in San Francisco, but it was based in Boston. We were having some changes, and the VP of HR came to the office to discuss these changes. And I was talking to her about the fact that I was studying computer science at night. I wanted to be a programmer like the engineers that were there. And she basically looked at me and she was like, "Honey, you are too pretty to go into engineering." And I was just absolutely dumbfounded. I'm like, "Oh, you're the VP of HR, for God's sake." But it was a moment for me where I realized, wow, people have these weird stereotypes and concepts of what women and men are supposed to do. I mean, it's like, I won't quote the year that this happened because that would be really dating me, but in this era of ours, how is this even possible? And I think about the numbers these ladies just quoted around. We were at 37% back in the mid-'80s. We're now at 18%. I was thinking about this last night. It's really frightening to me to think that we're going downhill from here. And if you think about the fact that our systems are all going online, the people who are behind developing these programs and services, in some cases this is about national security, in some cases this is about our health. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want one dominant group in charge of all that, whether it's white males or whether it's just women. We have to think holistically about the fact that we all need representation. Women, other minority groups have to be participating in the building of all these solutions that we're talking about. It can't just be one dominant group. And so it's scary to me, and I was starting to go into like sci-fi movie mode in my mind, and I was thinking, oh, that would be a great movie, that's really fucking scary, to think that we get down to 0% women, or 0% diversity in our field, and have just one group controlling all that. And we're all human, and inherently, because we're human, you would have those biases as you program and build something. So that should be frightening for all of us across the board.
But do you still feel like it's more work for women to prove themselves in a male-dominated work environment, or is it getting better? If you don't want to look at the numbers, how do you feel about this?
So I have something specific in mind here, but I will say that it is much more difficult, and as I progressed on in my career, what I was finding is that there are certain expectations of women's behavior, especially here in the US, that is stereotyped. If you don't behave like that soft, motherly woman in the workplace, you're dinged for it. So if you're assertive, you're viewed as aggressive, even though you're being assertive. And my example to you guys the other day, I was at Microsoft, and one of the first meetings I had was this meeting where, there were a bunch of men in the room, they're all fist banging on the tables or talking. And that certainly wasn't me, and yet, at some point in my career at Microsoft, they were like, Grace, gotta work on your soft skills. I'm surrounded by fist banging men. I don't do the fist banging, so what do you mean? And it was because I was being assertive in meetings, and they felt like I wasn't being the quiet, go along with the flow kind of woman that they were expecting. And so it was really interesting bias to hear. And this was in a day and age where we weren't seeing all these blog posts and news reports about unconscious bias and how men react to women in these meetings. But it's so very true, and I've experienced that myself, and it's only now that we actually have a label around this that we can talk about it.
Yeah, for me, being an assertive woman definitely can come with what I would call as bossy. And I remember I had a boss at Cisco, and he gave everybody on the team plaques that he found that he thought were funny and cute, and mine said, "I'm not bossy, I just have better ideas." And I still have that quote. Mostly I wear that proudly. I looking back, I'm like, maybe I should have been a little offended by it, but I thought it was kind of funny, because I was like, own it, I guess. If you're going to be assertive and really sort of be comfortable with that, then, it's their problem, not yours.
Thank you.
So you both are in technical fields, but say you didn't have the option to be in a technical field, what would you have gone into and why?
When I started my college career, because I had an aptitude for math, I thought, great, I'm going to become an accountant. And it only took me like a few weeks for me to realize, oh my God, what the hell was I thinking? So I went off the career planning track for accounting and was like, okay, I have no idea what I'm going to be. And I probably spent most of my career thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to be when I grow up. And so I have allowed my career to sort of shift and change along the way. So my earlier part of my career, I was a developer, but then I started to go and try other things out, like technical marketing for a little while. And then I went into pre-sales engineering, where I was more in the sales part of the function. And then I spent 8 years at Microsoft doing evangelism initiatives. And first of all, having been in Silicon Valley and going from startup to startup and that community of folks, if anybody had predicted for me that I would even go work for Microsoft, I would have laughed my ass off. But 8 years at Microsoft, I would have been like dying on the floor. But it was an amazing opportunity and experience. And sometimes you can't just look at something black and white, not be open to other potential opportunities and avenues. And for me, I wasn't quite there yet in deciding what I wanted to be when I grew up. And for me, I have this sort of idealistic view of the world that I want to be constantly learning. I want to keep that 5-year-old self in me that wants to look at things with new eyes, and to keep learning and interacting with people and making mistakes along the way, but being human.
I mean, if you asked me before I went into engineering, I would have said, oh, I'll be a math major, that sounds like a lot of fun. Looking back now, I guess I probably wouldn't change a thing. I like Grace, have had a fairly, developer support now in marketing for a while, and I imagine at some point that'll change again too, and it won't always be marketing, but just, being open to different possibilities. I I don't want to be any one thing, I just want to keep learning too.
I will say that for a short time, there was a period of my life where I really wanted to be a mad scientist and do something amazing in the world that really made it out in the news. And then after that, for a very short time in my life, I thought, God, I really want to be an FBI agent. Short-lived, never happened.
It's not
Oh,
too
short.
Maybe she's doing it now. That's
So talking about wanting to become an accountant or an FBI agent, so let's switch to role models from there. So do you have any role models along the way? Do you have any role models now, either in your professional life or personal life?
Let's talk about it first. I can't say I have a single role model. It's really hard and challenging to pick just one person that you want to be like. There's so many amazing people. So I look more at attributes of people that I appreciate what they're doing. And there's a lot of people I admire, and mostly for them doing things their way and not squishing people as they try to get to the top or anything like that. But it's really hard to say, I have a role model. When I was little, it was very Latin because I wanted to be a gymnast. But other than that, today there's just many different people that I admire for how they've lived through their careers and how they've progressed. What I will say though is, I didn't go through my career with a lot of strong women in the organizations that I've worked in. It's been predominantly male bosses, and all the people above them were men. I really not had a strong female person to sort of look at and go, wow, that's exactly who I want to be like. And so even when it comes to that, there's just, again, part of the problem with there not being a lot of women, I guess, is that there's not a lot of folks to even want to emulate yourself after, per se.
Yeah. So similar to Alison, I didn't have a specific role model, and I also really have a deep appreciation and love for the diversity I see in different people that I also admire, different skills that they might have. I also don't, I have never looked at someone and thought, I want to be just like that. I mean, even in my days when I was into tennis, I would look at Chris Everett and Martina Navratilova. Oh, that dated me. But anyway, they were great athletes, but I never looked at them like, I want to be just like that. I think there's so much to diversity and unique skill sets and the unique experience that you bring as being you that I didn't think of being like a replica of someone else. But I do have friends in the industry where I look at them and I really admire things like, them breaking the glass ceiling and carrying people with them along the way. So, to Alison's point, they didn't squish people to get there. What they did was to really build a community network of people where it was all about giving back and paying it forward and elevating themselves, but elevating other people, not that they were promoting just because they were friends, but because they mentored them, they coached them, and they were also realizing they could learn from their mentees. And so the reason we have now a mentoring rings that I kicked off here recently, and we had a session this week, and I have to honestly say I almost cried afterwards because it was our fourth session, and they are run by the mentees, and so each pair of mentees in the program actually goes in and runs a topic. And these are an amazing set of ladies. They're analysts, they're salespeople, they are developers, and they're all coming in, they're sharing their strengths, and where they don't have that particular strength that they're looking to talk about, they're learning about it, and they're sharing their learnings, and they're turning that around and sharing it with the group. And for me, I'm learning just as much as anybody else in that room, and I'm just so proud and amazed at the level of commitment and engagement in that group.
So the next question has to do with leadership roles, and I pulled up some statistics from a 2014 Catalyst report, and it talks about women in different leadership levels, and there was women that are CEOs, 5%, the top 5%, and then top earners, 8.1%, and 16.9% held board seats. So, as women are women in leadership, were you always interested in holding a role in leadership? How did that begin?
So, I would say I didn't always necessarily want to be in a leadership role or even knew that was what I wanted to do. There was a period in time when I realized at some point in the future I'd like to do it, but I resisted it for a while because I felt like there was a lot of stuff I had to work on for myself before I could be in any position, which is such a huge responsibility to have people that work for you and mentor them and coach them. And I didn't want to be the type of manager who just says, go and do stuff. I mean, my team doesn't think I do that. They're all here. But, you know, once I was ready, the biggest thing that I did though was I spoke up and I saw opportunities in my organization. I made sure that my boss, my boss's boss, other people's bosses knew that I was interested in managing. And so when an opportunity was available, they tapped me on the shoulder. So the biggest piece of advice around being a leader, I would say, is once you know it, advocate for yourself big time, because otherwise people don't read minds. You gotta be pretty persistent about it.
Yeah, so similar to Alison, I also wasn't really sure I ever wanted to go down the leadership track. In fact, my early days as an engineer, I had early opportunities to be an engineering manager for fairly large groups of engineers and ops people too, actually. It was kind of scary being that young and having a large group of folks depending on you as your leader. And what I realized at that time, and I did this for a very short period of time back then, because I personally recognized I just wasn't emotionally ready. I wasn't ready to do that because, one, I didn't feel like I'd had enough seasoning in my profession to feel like I could really add value and be that great coach. So I really view leaders as being someone that could have to coach and also be great negotiators with other leaders in the organization, and I just wasn't quite there. I didn't have a mentoring ring around me where I could go and get advice from other experienced leaders. And for me, too, I was a little too preoccupied and I recognized this weakness in myself with wanting to be everyone's friend. And you just, when you're a leader, you have to be really comfortable with people, giving you criticism. And when I was that young, it was really just too deeply difficult for me to manage that. I just, hey, it's okay for me to not be ready. I'm going to be ready for this later. So I decided to postpone that opportunity and give that to someone else, which at that time was really the right thing for me personally. And I really appreciate the fact that I had that early opportunity to do it. But as a leader, now I feel like, okay, so when someone gives me constructive feedback and really embrace that, I go, okay, that's a great learning for me. I've got to kind of continue to shift and change. And I'm personally okay with it, but back then it was just too early for me to take on that kind of, that load.
Thank you. I think part of this seeing the opportunity or switching roles is also seeking opportunities elsewhere or in different companies. And we are at this kind of boom of technology, especially in the Bay Area. There are so many new startups, so many smaller companies that are growing. And we see this concept or this phrase of job hopping all over the place, that people just keep switching jobs. I have some numbers here. So the average number of years that U.S. workers have been with their current employer is 4.6 years. But for young employees ages 20 to 34, that number is 2.3 years. So what do you think about the right time or the perfect timing to switch jobs? So how long is long enough, in other words?
So when I went to Microsoft, my very first year there, I was told, if you aren't switching jobs every 12 to 18 months, you're doing something wrong with your career. And I was like, what? Oh my God, really? And that was all right. A lot of people would shift roles, and it was based on basically fiscal year changes at Microsoft. And that was okay for Microsoft, and it actually gave me a lot of opportunity and exposure to different teams and to learn new skills and take on new initiatives. And that was the thing that actually kept me there for 8 years. It kept things exciting and different. I had new opportunities and new things to learn, which was great. And I was in the Valley for a while, hopping from startup to startup, and that also gave me a lot of opportunity where lots of different hats. I wasn't just an engineer. I had to do marketing stuff. I had to go help pitch it. I had to help with many other things besides just being an engineer. And so I loved that about being in a startup. And what I was telling these ladies earlier was, Microsoft, when I landed, I thought, a lot of people were like, oh, Microsoft, 90,000 people, that's gigantic. But when I was there, it felt to me like a bunch of startups all in one big umbrella of Microsoft. And so I had sort of the safety net. It was a stable company, but the sort of the excitement of more of that startup feel, which I really loved. And so I lasted there for a long time because I had my safety net, but I had sort of the fun excitement of kind of a startup feel.
Yeah, for me, I'd say there's no right or wrong time frame. Like you can say, hey, 3 years is the magic number. It's more about what's going on with you in your career at that time, what opportunities you're looking for, what you want to do next with your career, and sometimes that means you stay in the same company and you can find something else, and sometimes that means you need to look elsewhere. And when I made the shift from being more technical to going into marketing, I tried for a good 6 months at Cisco to move into you'd think in a big company like Cisco, you couldn't move around, but there's also that counter to that things move slowly. And I was at the satellite office in Massachusetts, so there just wasn't really as many opportunities, and so that was when I chose to leave Cisco, was because I wanted to make a complete change to my career and go into marketing as I was getting my MBA. And so, those are the kind of things you gotta think about, and I wouldn't fixate on the time as much as what's right for you when it's right, and what the organization is doing.
No, there's no magic number to any of this. You have to put everything in context and evaluate what you need out of your career at that point in time. It's not you gotta move every 12 to 18 months. It's gotta be about like what you really need out of your career at that point in time.
So my question has to do with a work-life balance, and just looking through some articles, and one kind of stuck out in particular because of where we are located geographically, but it was a 2015 New York Times article titled "Silicon Valley Some Worker Struggles for Parents," and it highlights that Silicon Valley, well known for tech, there's also a lot of obstacles for working parents, and this has been kind of a growing issue in the economy, in the U.S. economy, and just adjusting the realism of family life, and I think that we struggle more than other developed countries in the world, and that's what this article discusses. So I wanted to talk to you two about that.
What do you call it? Your work-life chaos?
Yes.
I don't think balance has ever really existed. It's more about optimizing for things at the right time and priorities based on what's going on.
Embracing the chaos.
Yes, embracing the chaos. That's good too.
So how do you balance it all?
I mean, for me, I try to carve out little moments of the day with my kids. Mine is mostly in the morning because that's when they're the sanest. They hit the witching hour at about the hour of 3:30 to 5:30. Fortunately, my husband has them then. But it's really about trying to optimize around what's important at a given point in time. So sometimes my work life is way busier than my husband's is, and so he's bearing more of the responsibility with the kids, and it switches sometimes, and those roles reverse. And so it's about making sure we can optimize for those things, and when we are both really busy, having to make trade-offs at that point in time, and also doing the things as a family that I enjoy doing, and he does the things he enjoys doing. So he likes to cook, and I do not, so he does all the cooking, or I'll do the baths and get them ready for bed, and so it's more about finding your rhythm and groove within your own situation and prioritizing based on what's going on at a moment in time. And my kids are really little still, and so they literally are just, the baby wants to just hang on me all the time, and so we gotta try and figure out how to deal with that too, and just a glass of wine from there helps.
Well, I'm sorry.
So my kids are a little older, and so my quality time with them tends to be in the evening when I get home. My transition period for that quality time is cooking. I love cooking. It's really meditative for me. I treat my kitchen as a sort of science lab, and so I try out new
Going back to that
new
science
recipes.
thing.
Yes, sometimes they work out, and sometimes they don't. And they're very honest and they let me know, but it's my time to sort of disconnect and really be on the same page with my family, catch up with them, hear how their day went, and really, have that quality time with them. Because the day is really busy, I'm rushing out the door, and they're getting ready for school, so the time that we have is really in the evenings as we're settling down for dinner and having that family discussion. There's some research reports about the fact that families who sit down together regularly for dinner, their children do much better academically in school, and so that's very important for me as well, as just to make sure we're having that religiously together as a family, that quality time. And I would say too that, like Alison, my spouse is also a very ambitious person with their career. He also travels, so we're constantly negotiating about who's traveling when, because we have had conflicts about, both of us needing to travel the same week, and we have to sit down and really scrutinize, okay, why is that important? Who else on your team could potentially do that instead? So there's that piece of it, and so that can be sometimes stressful, but you work it out and you realize that at the end of the day, the most important thing is your family and the safety of your family, the quality of life that you have. There's nothing ever really life-threatening about the high-tech work that we do, so it's really about making those tough calls sometimes.
What about like turning off, just switching off, or when to not check emails, or when to just step away? Like, do you both encounter difficulties with that, or do you kind of have a routine or something? What are your
I have a very hard time disconnecting. I'm not great at that at all. If I see an email or a notification pop up on my phone, it's like a red beacon. Like, I can't help myself. I've got to look at it. And technology today really just makes it too easy to get sucked into things. And so sometimes I just have to keep my phone in the other room, or force myself to. I mean, it's my clock. It's on my nightstand at night, which is foolish. Like, I should get an alarm clock. Like, I don't need to use my phone for that. So for me, I just try to sort of I have to force myself not to look, and it's really hard, admittedly. So if someone has a better answer or has tricks to it, I'm all ears.
Yeah, so I find that technology can be really addictive. I think you guys all go through this. Like, you're looking at your phone all the time, looking for that next text or next message or whatever it is, because it makes you feel connected with other people even when you don't actually see them. But for me, I have to sort of mentally switch that off and go, okay, I'm done for the day. Either, I'm going to do some cooking now, hang out with the kids, and then as they're going to bed, then I'm switching back on for a little while, and then for me, I need my me time, and I'm switching it back off and go, okay, now I'm going to actually mentally rest and prepare for tomorrow, and just disconnect and have that time to just be free of things that are just work-related, because I think that's where the creativity aspect really comes in, is that you can flush your mind of all the noise that happens during the day. That's when you can have that time to really be creative on your own without the dependency of all the minor things that are happening throughout the day. But I think if you don't do that, you're not going to have that ability to think out of the box during your workday and solve those tough problems. And so to me, it's really important to just disconnect and go, okay, now it's just me time. Now I'm just gonna do nothing, or I'm gonna go exercise or whatever it is, and invest in that, because otherwise, if I'm only doing work all the time, then I'm living in a little bubble. I'm not getting that sort of perspective from the outside world and everything else that's going on. And so back to the point around the percentage of women dropping, again, it's that insular view of the world can happen to any of us, right? So we're putting in biases, and so I always want to have that constant learning and thinking that is removed from just work stuff.
I mean, so there's a lot of people in this company, and like myself, when we don't have kids, and it's sometimes it's difficult to balance. Or sometimes I'll be thinking, I don't have time, there's so much to do. And then what about the people that I work with that have small children? How do they do it? But could you give some advice for people that don't have families or are heavily involved in any other activities, how to balance work and life?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. The integrated life, the work-life balancing, isn't just a working families thing, it's an everybody thing. So whether you're just starting out in your career or you're midstream in your career, you don't have kids, whatever that is, you should be finding your passions. And that passion should be work, because if you don't love your job, you're probably in the wrong place, and you got to figure out what that passion is. Because if you're spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week, that's a big freaking chunk of your life. You better love it, right? Life is too short to be doing something you hate. So that's one. And the second is, for everything else outside of your life, you got to find those other passions, because again, you've got to have that level of balance so that you can be creative, solve those tough problems, and be a real whole person and participate. So that's something I would really recommend, whether it's mountain biking, whether it's going out being a marathon runner, whatever it is, find that passion, go do things, go explore the world. It's so important.
Yeah, and I would just say, just like for parents, if you don't have kids, it's still all about setting your boundaries and not letting people cross them. I mean, we all have those times when work is busy and you're going to go a little bit over and more hours and stuff like that, but that should be the exception, not the rule. Like, my boundaries, I can't leave my house at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm with my kids, my childcare isn't there, and that's my boundary. And people try to set up 8:30 meetings, and sometimes I can make it work, but usually I'm like, no, can't do an 8:30 meeting. I'm not going to get here in time. And so you just have to be diligent about it, and it's not always easy, but whether it's because you have children or because you want to go to the gym and you're training for a marathon, those are equally important goals, and no one should feel guilty about having those boundaries in place.
Yeah, you shouldn't feel guilty about living your life.
I have a kind of a difficult question now. We all have different roles or at different levels in our life, different mindsets, but if you can give just one piece of advice to women, what would that be? Just one sentence.
I think I already talked a little bit about this. It's really finding that passion. It's so really important. And I will tell you now this, and I'm not going to give you like dates or time frames because again, I really don't want to take myself, but things go in the blink of an eye. And I remember, for instance, my first child, he was saying, oh, before you know it, she's going to be a teenager. Well, my daughter just turned 9. When she turned 9, she said, next year, that's going to be double digits. I'm going to be an old lady. Thanks, it makes me feel so much better. But it goes in the blink of an eye. Like yesterday, she was a tiny little baby. Now she's, this very funny little girl. And, it seems like just yesterday when I bumped into old friends of mine from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it seems like yesterday, but it is not yesterday anymore. It was a long, long time ago. And I have not regretted any work experience that I've ever had. They've all been great learning experiences, and I've always stuck with my one piece of advice to myself, which was I will never stay somewhere where I'm unhappy, because 40, 50, 60 hours a week is too much of my life to be unhappy. I'm unwilling to do that. So, it's really important for you to really find the thing that makes you tick, that you are jumping out of bed and going, gotta get to work. Gotta solve that problem. I wake up in the middle of the night, my head is turning solving problems, and I will write it on a piece of paper so I can go back to sleep. Because that's how important my work is to me. Not because I'm a workaholic, because I'm that invested. It's a big chunk of my life. But I'm also invested in things going on with my kids. And I'll wake up in the middle of the night, solving problems for my kids too, and I'll do the same thing. I'll write it down. And so that's what I would say is find those passions both at work and outside of work. Really live your life fully, because it goes so quickly. And I will also say, additional piece of advice, when you're building your network, do your best to not miss your lunches with your friends. And I say this because a long time ago, I had a lunch appointment with a good friend of mine, Chris, who was one of the folks that helped establish peer mentoring rings at Microsoft. She was a really lovely lady who had no support from her management team to do the kinds of things she was doing to support our women's diversity network at Microsoft. But she bucked, the system. She did whatever she needed to do to help us. She helped us get some amazing speakers. And I had actually known her from the start, many, many years before that. And I remember her as the marketing woman who would always wear purple. And she wore purple every day, even back then when she was at Microsoft. And she was just such a great champion for us. And we were gonna go have lunch and just catch up. And for some reason, some minor work thing came up, and it was probably really minor because I don't even remember what it was. And I missed lunch with her, and a few months later, she passed away in her sleep. She was only like 55. So I've always regretted missing that lunch with her, because I would have loved to have had that one last lunch with that person.
I want to add a third piece of advice. I would say follow your gut. Like, immediately when I was 13 years old, I'm like, I'm going to be an engineer, that's what I'm going to do, and I was so fixated on it, but that's changed about 5 times over since then, and so just go with the flow. Don't be stuck to one definition of yourself, because none of us are just one thing, and so be willing to go where, the wind takes you a little bit, and don't be afraid of it, just go with it.
Go with your calling, except in my case, when I was 12, I had a calling to become a nun, and thank God I didn't go that direction.
Sister Grace.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, ladies. I personally really enjoyed working with you behind the scenes and here.
It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. And I think we got open to Q&A now. If anybody has any questions, raise your hands.
Don't be shy.
Or shout it out.
Can I ask kind of a geeky question, since you guys both have engineering backgrounds? What's the first piece of software you remember writing or working on?
My first piece of software was at IBM. I was in the Lotus division, and I actually started my career there as a support engineer. And in between calls, I actually taught myself Lotus script, which was not documented, and nobody knew how to use the freaking thing. Nobody knew how to use the APIs, so I would hack away, test things out, and learn how the APIs actually worked. And at that same time, I got really interested in the web. It was very early days of the web. So I taught myself HTML, JavaScript, and this was in the day when HTML had like no layouts. So you couldn't like put any coordinates to where a button or a field would go. And this was the heyday in the early days of webifying your Windows clients and apps. And the desktop database that I worked on was something called Lotus Approach. It competed with Access, Microsoft Access. So we were trying to get these Windows-based apps to be dynamic reports on the web. This was like such the cool, like, new thing you could do. It was really innovative. And the fact that you could have dynamic data was like, wow. This was before the drama of, what? You're going to purchase something off the internet? Are you crazy? Before that era, we were trying to webify things. And so I actually built an app that took these Windows apps and simulated those reports and forms in HTML form and report without that layout and control. So I had to build like crazy heuristics to get those to lay out and simulate what you saw in a much more precise manner on Windows. And so that was a combination of the Lotus script, of JavaScript, HTML. I don't think I used any Java in there, but I used an IBM's DB2 connector, which was their dynamic data enabler. And so I actually have a patent for that. It was my very first patent that I had. And I largely did that on my own. I had a little bit of advice from the DB2 guys on how to use the connector, but that was something I went and hacked away. And I remember also talking to one of the very senior engineers in the Approach database department, and he just thought, oh my God, this person who's like not a seasoned engineer is going to go do this thing. And when I showed it to him, I really appreciated the fact that he was like, wow, you did that in 3 months on your own. So I appreciated the fact that it was like that. That's awesome. And about 2-3 years later, I'd gotten a call from one of the architects who had moved to Japan to be sort of a roving CTO. And he remembered my work at Lotus and said, hey, I'm trying to hire an engineer to do web stuff here. Can you come for an interview to Tokyo? So, okay, so I looked at the impression that someone was willing to fly me to Tokyo for an interview to be a web developer. That you will taste that.
Some of the earlier things I remember during college, there were a couple of ridiculous projects that I had to work on. One of them was having to write things in assembly to make a little like LED light up, so I had to take an assembly class, which who's going to really use that? But that was one of the most ridiculous ones. But my engineering degree is actually more hardware-based than software, and so I had to take a lot of classes. So one of my internships I had during college was I had to write some C++ programs to actually go on these ROM. I can't even describe what they are anymore, but they were some sort of like physical ROM that you'd have to like send the code to this little physical device and then see if it could process things on these chips properly. And so it was the first time where I actually did something in a professional environment where I kind of knew what I was working on was going to actually make it into some sort of product, and it was pretty remarkable. And I remember just sitting in my office, like, because everyone had an office then, it wasn't like open culture, and it was Lucent. So it was a pretty old school company. And it was just, I remember like hacking away and like being like super excited that every time I did this thing, it would be connected to this device and it would load up the code and like, okay, no whammies, didn't work. And so that was probably one of my first earliest experiences of actually coding something that would get used in a meaningful way at least.
Thank you. Next question? Go for it.
So Alison, you mentioned you had an MBA, and Grace, I'm not sure if you do or not, but did you always know you were going to do that, or is that something you decided to do after you started your career and took the opportunity?
I decided later on, basically once I had my realization that I didn't want to be slogging away at code personally anymore, and I really wanted a more socially oriented or human component oriented job, that's when I decided to go back for my MBA, and I was fortunately at a company that pay to go part-time or give you so much reimbursement. And so while I was at Cisco, I took advantage of that and decided, but it was something I decided probably 5 or 6 years into my career, not right away at all.
Yeah, because I had a non-traditional route for my education. I spent so many years already taking classes while I was working that the thought of going back to school was like, oh my God. So I was very lucky I had many opportunities to shift into other disciplines just through work without having to go, re-educate in order to do that.
So knowing that you work in primarily quite male-dominated environment, what attributes do you think that are kind of uniquely female that you think you bring to the team that really help balance it out? Any ideas on that?
So I will say first that I can't really describe the specific qualities, but my last role at Microsoft, I had to go do open source initiatives. And that translated into my first 6 months going to these open source communities and their events where they were like, you're with Microsoft, what the fuck are you doing here? And so I think me being a woman though allowed me the ability to build relationships really rapidly in that first 6 months, that I was able to meet key contributors to the projects, the leaders and founders of those projects, and help them to see that win-win right away, and that I was really genuinely there to build a long-lasting relationship, to find how we can make our joint customers successful. And that's something I've been able to repeat over and over and over again, and that's part of what other people view as part of my personal brand, that I credibly and genuinely heartfelt want to help them be successful along with the success of my own personal company that I'm representing at that time. And I think there's something of a female, attribute there in building community as a strength and building relationships as a strength. Men do it as well, but it's done a little bit differently. And when you're going into hostile territory, like a Microsoft person going into open source, I think I had a little bit of just that added advantage of being a woman who didn't look like typical Microsoft guy in a suit, looking aggressive and banging on the fist and wanting to have something done because we're Microsoft. So I think that worked to my advantage. And I will say too that I was on a panel at a Drupal conference once in Chicago, and somebody said, well, how do you measure your ROI for coming to all these events and investing in all these things you do in open source? And I couldn't give them the real metrics. So I said, well, off the cuff, my personal metric is what I call my hug count ROI. I started off going to these events and people would say, what the fuck are you doing here? You're Microsoft. And not more than 6 months later, people were actually genuinely open arms, giving me literal hugs saying, thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sponsoring. How can we work together? So it was things like that I recognized as, hey, I'm really making a difference here. I mean, it went up and up and up as the time went on, as the events went on. And it wasn't just me, so that extended out to my peers who started coming to the events as well. And I felt really good about that. I felt that there was some female advantage there and helping me along there.
I would say a lot of it was relationship building, definitely. I mean, so in my early career, when I was a developer, I was actually going to client sites and building custom applications. So I wasn't an engineer building a product, but I was actually going out and building Java apps. And so you get thrown into very different environments with people of all different, and most of my clients were government. And so there's definitely a unique culture within development teams in government.
Oh yeah.
And so I think just by being able to go in there, and I think part of my personal brand is I'm able to treat different people differently, and not in the bad way, but in the sort of customizing my approach to how I interact with somebody and sort of adapting to what works best for them. I don't feel like I'm here, you need to come to where I am. I will always meet you where you are. And so because I was able to do that, I was able to build relationships in almost every one of these places I was put into, and ultimately, like Grace, I was getting requested to go to all of these client locations in completely different regions that I wasn't even technically assigned to, because I made such a important and impactful impression from a relationship perspective with everybody at all of these different client sites. And so I don't know if that's uniquely female, but I felt like relationship and more of those soft skills tend to be associated with females more than males.